You know that feeling when you're sitting in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by people who seem to breathe confidence, and you feel like you're actually shrinking into your chair? That's been my entire professional life. My name is Mariam, and I am a software engineer in the heart of Silicon Valley. San Francisco is a city built on the hustle, a place where if you don't shout your achievements from the rooftops, people assume you haven't achieved anything at all. For someone like me, someone who finds eye contact more exhausting than a 10-mile hike, this city can feel like a beautiful, high-tech cage. I moved here 4 years ago with a master's degree, a brilliant portfolio, and a voice that lived mostly in my throat, never quite making it to my lips. I work for a company called Quantum Dynamics. We're tucked away in a sleek building with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the bay. On paper, I'm a senior developer. In reality, I'm the person who stays until 9 p.m. fixing the bugs that everyone else ignored, the one who writes the core logic for our most successful apps, and the one who gets passed over for every major presentation. I used to tell myself that it didn't matter. I told myself that good work speaks for itself. That was the biggest lie I ever believed. In America, especially in the tech industry, work doesn't speak. People speak. And if you aren't the one speaking for your work, someone else will gladly do it for you. Enter Jack. Jack sat in the cubicle right next to mine, separated only by a thin fabric partition that did nothing to muffle the sound of his constant, booming voice. Jack was the kind of guy who spent more time at the office espresso machine than at his keyboard. He was charming, tall, and had this effortless way of making everyone feel like he was their best friend. He was also, quite frankly, a mediocre programmer at best. But Jack understood something I didn't. He understood the currency of perception. He knew that in a fast-paced company, the person who explains the solution often gets more credit than the person who actually built it. For months, Jack had been mentoring me, or so he called it. In reality, he would lean over my desk, look at my screen, and ask me to explain my logic. I'd spend an hour walking him through a complex algorithm I'd spent weeks perfecting. I felt helpful. I felt like I was finally making a friend. But then, the weekly team meetings would happen. Our manager, David, a man who worshipped at the altar of innovation and boldness, would ask for updates on our latest project, an AI-driven predictive engine we called Project Aurora. My heart would start its familiar, frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I'd have my notes ready, my data points organized, but when David's eyes scanned the room, I'd look down at my notepad. I'd wait for a gap in the conversation that never seemed to come. And that's when Jack would strike. He'd lean back, put his hands behind his head, and say, "So, David, I've been thinking about the neural mapping for Aurora. I've developed a way to bypass the latency issues we were seeing in the beta." Then he would proceed to explain, word for word, the solution I had explained to him at my desk just the day before. He wouldn't say, "Mariam and I were talking." He wouldn't say, "Mariam found a fix." He'd say, "I." Every time he said that word, it felt like a tiny needle pricking my skin. I would sit there, paralyzed by my own shyness, my face burning red. I wanted to scream, "That's my code. Those are my hours of sleep you're talking about." But the words would die in my chest. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to be difficult. I didn't want David to think I was petty. The American corporate culture emphasizes team players, but it also rewards disruptors. Jack was playing both sides perfectly. He was the friendly teammate to my face and the brilliant disruptor in the boardroom. I remember one specific Tuesday. We were facing a massive deadline for the Aurora prototype. I had found a critical vulnerability in the security layer, a flaw that could have leaked user data if we went live. I stayed up for 36 hours straight, fueled by cold coffee and sheer anxiety, to rewrite the entire authentication protocol. When I finally finished, I was so tired I could barely see. I told Jack about it because I was proud of the fix and I needed to tell someone. "Wow, Mariam," he had said, giving me a supportive pat on the shoulder. "You really saved our skins. You should get some sleep." I'll make sure David knows how much work you put in." I believed him. I actually felt grateful. I went home, crashed into bed, and slept for 12 hours. When I walked into the office the next day, the entire floor was buzzing. David had sent out a company-wide email praising Jack for his heroic effort in securing the Aurora prototype overnight. There was no mention of me, not even a CC on the email. I walked past the break room and heard Jack laughing, telling a group of interns how he'd had a eureka moment at 3 a.m. while looking at the security logs. I stood by the water cooler, my hands shaking so hard I spilled water on my shoes. I felt a cold, hollow sensation in my stomach. It wasn't just the stolen credit, it was the realization that I was helping him do it. My silence was his greatest weapon. By being too shy to speak up, I was handing him the keys to my career. That afternoon, David called us into his office. He looked excited. "The board is thrilled with the progress on Aurora," he said, looking directly at Jack. "We've decided to appoint a project lead for the next phase. It's a huge promotion, Jack. More responsibility, a significant raise, and you'll be the face of Aurora when we pitch to the VCs in Palo Alto next month." Jack beamed. "I'm honored, David. I've put everything I have into this project." Then, David turned to me. His expression softened, but it was the kind of softness you use for a child or a wounded animal. "Mariam, you've been a great support to Jack. Your technical execution is solid. We want you to continue as the lead developer under Jack's direction. We know you prefer to stay out of the limelight anyway, so this should be a perfect fit for your style." Perfect fit. Those words felt like a slap. I looked at David, then at Jack. Jack had the audacity to look me in the eye and smile, a small, triumphant smirk that said, "I win." I opened my mouth to say something. I wanted to say I wrote the code. I found the flaw. I am the reason this project still exists. But the air in the room felt thick, like I was trying to speak underwater. My throat tightened, and all that came out was a weak, "Thank you, David." I walked back to my desk, sitting in the same chair, in the same cubicle, looking at the same lines of code. But everything had changed. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. I saw a girl who was brilliant, hardworking, and absolutely invisible. I realized that if I didn't change, this would be the rest of my life. I would be the engine that made other people's cars move, while I stayed stuck in the mud. The promotion I had earned with my sweat and my intellect was now sitting in Jack's pocket. And the worst part? He was now my boss. As the sun began to set over the San Francisco skyline, casting long, orange shadows across my desk, I felt a new sensation. It wasn't the usual fluttering of anxiety or the heavy weight of sadness. It was something sharper. Something hotter. It was anger. Not just at Jack, but at myself. I had been nice for 26 years, and all it had gotten me was a front row seat to my own professional robbery. I realized that in this country, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you take. And Jack had taken everything. I decided right then, staring at my blinking cursor, that I was done being the quiet girl in the back. I was going to get my project back, even if I had to break every nice bone in my body to do it. The anger I felt that night didn't fade by morning. It settled into a cold, hard knot in my chest. I realized that if I was going to fight back, I couldn't just start shouting in meetings. That wasn't me, and it wouldn't work. Jack was a master of words, and if I challenged him on his home turf, the realm of charisma and public speaking, he would crush me. I had to fight him with the only thing I had that he didn't, actual technical expertise. In the American corporate landscape, executive presence is important, but at a tech company, the code is the ultimate truth. I just had to make that truth impossible to ignore. The following week, Jack started his new role as project lead. He was insufferable. He moved into a larger office with a view of the Bay Bridge and spent most of his time in strategy sessions, which was really just him taking credit for the team's work in front of high-level VPs. He began treating me like his personal assistant. He'd forward me emails from clients with technical questions, adding a Mariam, take a look at this for me, thanks, without even reading them. He was coasting on my hard work, and he was getting away with it because he assumed I would never grow a backbone. But I was working on something he didn't know about. Every night, after the office cleared out and the cleaning crews started their rounds, I stayed behind. I wasn't just fixing Jack's bugs anymore. I was building a shadow version of Project Aurora. Jack had taken my initial design and made it flashy for the investors, but in doing so, he had ignored the deep architectural flaws I'd warned him about. He wanted speed and sexiness over stability. I knew that when we tried to scale the system for a real-world trial, it would buckle. I spent those late nights building the solution to the disaster I knew was coming. The turning point came when David announced that the CEO of a major retail giant was coming to the office for a live demonstration. This was the make or break moment for the company. If the demo was a success, we'd secure a $10 million contract. If it failed, Project Aurora and potentially the company would be dead in the water. Jack was, of course, chosen to give the presentation. He spent days practicing his speech, choosing the right suit, and ordering expensive catering. He didn't spend a single minute looking at the deployment scripts. Mariam, Jack said, leaning into my cubicle on the morning of the demo. He smelled of expensive cologne and overconfidence. I need you to handle the backend during the live feed. Just keep the servers running while I walk them through the UI. It's a simple stress test. 50,000 concurrent users. We've done this a million times, right? I looked up at him. My heart was pounding, but not with the usual fear. It was the adrenaline of a gambler who knew she had the winning hand. Actually, Jack, the threading model we're using is prone to deadlocks at that volume. I've mentioned it in the last 3 status reports. Jack laughed, a dismissive, patronizing sound that echoed through the quiet office. Always the pessimist, Mariam. That's why you're the dev and I'm the lead. Don't worry about the reports. Just make sure the dashboard looks green. That's all the CEO cares about. Perception is reality, remember. He walked away, leaving me staring at my screen. Perception is reality. He really believed that. He believed that as long as the lights were pretty, the engine didn't need to work. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated resolve. I wasn't going to sabotage him. I didn't have to. The system he had led was already broken because he refused to listen to the person who built it. I decided that today, reality was going to catch up with perception. The demo took place in the Innovation Lab, a high-tech room filled with leather chairs and massive touchscreens. The CEO of the retail giant, a sharp-featured woman named Elena who looked like she could smell a lie from a mile away, sat in the front row. David was beaming, standing next to her. Jack stood at the podium, looking every bit the Silicon Valley star. I was tucked away at a small terminal in the corner, my face hidden behind a monitor, tasked with keeping the dashboard green. Jack began his presentation. He was good, I had to give him that. He spoke about synergy, disruptive analytics, and the future of consumer behavior. He showed beautiful slides with upward trending arrows. Elena looked impressed. David looked proud. Then came the moment of truth, the live stress test. And now, Jack said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, we will show you Aurora's true power. We are going to simulate 50,000 customers interacting with our platform simultaneously. Mariam, if you please. I didn't look at him. I just hit the execute key. On the giant screen, the numbers began to climb. 10,000. 20,000. 30,000. The room was silent, the only sound being the hum of the air conditioning. At 40,000, the UI began to stutter. A small red warning light flashed on my private terminal. Memory leak. The database was choking on the inefficient queries Jack had insisted on using because they were faster to implement. As you can see, Jack said, ignoring the slight lag on the screen, even under heavy load, Aurora remains. Suddenly, the screen went black. Then, a massive, blinking error message appeared in the center of the display. Critical system failure. Kernel panic. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels like a physical weight. Jack's face went from tan to a sickly, grayish-white in 3 seconds. He started clicking the mouse frantically, his voice rising in pitch. It's just a local network glitch. 1 second. Mariam? Mariam, what did you do? Fix the connection. He was doing it again. Even in the face of total disaster, his first instinct was to point the finger at me. He looked at the CEO and David, his eyes wide with panic. I'm so sorry. It seems my developer pushed an unstable update this morning without my approval. I'll have this resolved in a moment. David's face was a mask of fury. Elena just leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, looking thoroughly unimpressed. This was the moment where the old Mariam would have panicked. I would have scrambled to find an excuse, apologized for a mistake I didn't make, and spent the next hour trying to revive Jack's broken system while he watched over my shoulder. But I didn't move. I didn't type a single character. I slowly stood up from my corner terminal. I didn't look at Jack. I looked directly at Elena and David. It's not a network glitch, and it wasn't an unapproved update, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and incredibly loud in the small room. The system crashed because the threading model Jack insisted on using cannot handle more than 35,000 concurrent requests. I've documented this risk in 4 separate technical memos over the last month, all of which were ignored by the project lead. Jack gasped. Mariam, how dare you? I'm not finished, Jack, I said, cutting him off. The feeling of interrupting him was the most intoxicating sensation I'd ever experienced. I walked toward the front of the room, my heart steady. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket. Knowing that the current architecture was unstable, I developed a parallel backend structure on my own time. It uses a non-blocking queue system that I proposed 3 months ago. I looked at David. I can deploy the stable version right now. It will take exactly 90 seconds. Or, we can let Jack continue to click refresh on a dead server. David looked at me, then at the sweating, stammering man at the podium, and then back at me. It was like he was seeing me for the first time. Do it, Mariam, he said. I stepped up to the podium, gently but firmly nudging Jack aside. He stumbled back, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. I plugged in my drive, ran the script, and watched as the black screen vanished. The dashboard roared back to life. I initiated the stress test again. 50,000. 60,000. 100,000 concurrent users. The system didn't even flinch. I turned to Elena. That, I said, is Project Aurora. For the first time in my life, the room wasn't shrinking. I was the biggest thing in it. And as I looked at Jack's terrified face, I realized that the quiet girl hadn't just found her voice, she had used it to build a bridge, and then she'd watched as the man who tried to steal it fell right through the cracks. The aftermath of the demo was unlike anything I had ever experienced in a professional setting. Usually, when a meeting ends, there's a polite scramble for the door, a few handshakes, and everyone disappears back into their digital bubbles. But this time, the air was thick with the scent of a collapsed ego. Jack stood by the wall, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, while David and Elena huddled around my monitor, mesmerized by the data streams that were now flowing with perfect, rhythmic precision. I felt a strange, buzzing energy in my fingertips. I had just done the unthinkable. I had spoken truth to power, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it looked like it was finally starting to make sense. Elena was the first to speak. She didn't look at David or Jack. She kept her eyes on the metrics. This architecture, she said, her voice sharp and appreciative, it's not just a patch. This is a complete reimagining of the data flow. Who did you say designed this, David? David looked at me, his expression a mix of awe and profound embarrassment. He was a smart man, and he knew exactly what had just happened. He realized that for months, he had been listening to a storyteller while the actual architect had been sitting in the shadows. Mariam did, David said, his voice unusually quiet. Mariam built the stable version. I see, Elena said. She turned to me, her gaze piercing, but not unkind. Mariam, why wasn't this the version we saw from the start? If you knew the other one would fail, why let the presentation proceed with it? The old me would have stammered. I would have said I didn't want to cause trouble. But the new me, the one who had just survived the most stressful 10 minutes of her life, found a different answer. In this industry, we're often told that leadership is about vision and persuasion, I said, looking her in the eye. I provided the technical warnings, but they weren't part of the vision. I decided that the only way to protect the company's future was to have the solution ready when the vision failed. I didn't want the demo to fail, but I couldn't stop it from failing if the lead didn't believe the data. Jack finally found his voice, though it sounded weak and desperate. David, she's exaggerating. It was a team effort. I gave her the parameters for that secondary build. I told her to have a backup ready just in case. It was my strategy. It was a pathetic move. Even the interns in the back of the room looked away in embarrassment. David didn't even look at him. He just held up a hand to silence Jack. Enough, Jack. Go to my office. Now. As Jack shuffled out of the room, Elena turned back to me. I want a full technical breakdown of this non-blocking queue system by tomorrow morning. If the documentation is as solid as the performance I just saw, we're ready to sign. But Mariam, I want to deal with you directly. No more middlemen. Understood, I said. My voice didn't shake. Not even a little. When the room finally cleared, David stayed behind. He sat in one of the leather chairs inside, looking at the ceiling. How long, Mariam? He asked. How long has he been taking credit for your work? I sat down across from him. I didn't feel like a subordinate anymore. I felt like a partner. Since the beginning of Project Aurora, David. The neural mapping, the security layer, the UI mockups, they were all mine. I was just too afraid to tell you. I thought if I worked hard enough, you'd eventually see it on your own. David shook his head. I should have seen it. That's on me. I got caught up in the energy Jack brought to the room. In Silicon Valley, we have a bad habit of falling in love with the hustle and forgetting to check the engine. You're the engine, Mariam. And I've been letting a salesman drive the car. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city. Jack is done. I can't have someone on my team who lies to me and intimidates his colleagues. But that leaves me with a massive hole in my leadership. We have the retail giant contract on the line, and the VCs are expecting a lead who can handle the pressure. He turned back to me. You've proven you can handle the pressure, Mariam. But being a lead engineer isn't just about the code. It's about the meetings, the politics, and the people. Are you ready to stop hiding? Are you ready to be the face of this project? This was the moment of truth. My shyness was screaming at me to say no. It was telling me to stay in my cubicle, stay safe, and just let someone else handle the people stuff. But then I thought about the months of feeling invisible. I thought about the sick feeling in my stomach every time Jack stole my words. I realized that the safety of my silence was actually a prison. I said, my voice firm. But I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to be a hustler. I'm going to be a leader who values technical truth. And I'm going to make sure that everyone on my team, no matter how quiet they are, gets credit for what they build. David smiled. I think that's exactly what this company needs. Go home, Mariam. Get some rest. Tomorrow morning, you're moving into the lead office. And we have a lot of work to do. I walked out of the innovation lab and back to my desk to grab my bag. The office was quiet, but I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. Word had already spread. Mark, a junior dev who had always been kind to me, gave me a thumbs up as I passed. I didn't look down at my shoes. I nodded back. As I walked out of the building and into the cool San Francisco evening, the city looked different. The lights of the skyscrapers didn't seem so intimidating anymore. I realized that my shyness hadn't been a permanent part of my soul. It was just a wall I had built to protect myself. And today, I had finally knocked it down. I wasn't just Mariam the coder anymore. I was Mariam, the lead engineer of Project Aurora. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. I was the one who was going to build it. Moving into the corner office wasn't the cinematic triumph I had imagined. In the American corporate world, a promotion doesn't just mean a bigger desk, it means a bigger target on your back. As I sat in the chair Jack had occupied only 48 hours prior, I felt the phantom weight of his presence. The room still smelled like his expensive cologne and desperation. I looked at the glass walls and realized that being the face of Project Aurora meant everyone could now see my mistakes as clearly as my successes. The old Mariam wanted to pull the blinds and hide, but the new Mariam knew that visibility was the only way to maintain the ground I had gained. My first Monday as lead engineer began with the dreaded all-hands meeting. David had asked me to address the entire engineering department, over 60 people, to explain the new roadmap. As I stood backstage at the small auditorium we used for town halls, my knees started to do that familiar, rhythmic shake. My throat felt like it was closing. This was different from the innovation lab. This wasn't just technical defense. This was leadership. This was the moment I had to convince 60 cynical, overworked developers that I was the right person to follow. "You've got this, Mariam," David whispered, leaning in beside me. "Just tell them the truth. They're tired of the fluff. Give them the code." I stepped out onto the stage. The lights were blindingly bright, casting a glare over the rows of faces. I saw my old team in the third row. I saw the VPs in the front. I took a deep breath and, for a second, the silence was terrifying. Then I remembered that I wasn't there to be Jack. I wasn't there to perform. "Most of you know me as the girl who didn't say much in the break room," I began, my voice echoing through the speakers. "And honestly, I'm still that person. I'm an introvert. I find these meetings harder than debugging a legacy database. But I'm standing here today because I realized that when we stay silent, the wrong people fill the noise." Project Aurora almost failed not because we lacked talent, but because we lacked technical honesty. That stops today. I didn't use flashy animations. I didn't use buzzwords like synergy or pivoting. I pulled up a live terminal on the big screen and showed them the actual architecture. I walked them through the flaws we had fixed and the challenges that remained. I spoke to them as a fellow builder, not a manager. By the time I finished, the silence in the room had changed. It wasn't the silence of boredom, it was the silence of respect. When the Q&A started, I didn't deflect. When a senior dev challenged my threading model, I didn't get defensive. I debated him with logic. For the first time, I felt the power of expertise as a tool for connection rather than a reason to hide. However, the real test of my leadership came from an unexpected source. A few days later, a woman named Sarah, a high-level project manager from the marketing department, walked into my office. Sarah was the embodiment of the alpha corporate personality, fast-talking, aggressive, and completely focused on the bottom line. "Mariam, congrats on the move," she said, not waiting for an invitation to sit. "Look, Jack promised us a feature set for the Q3 launch that included real-time sentiment analysis. Marketing has already built the entire campaign around it. We've got billboards being printed. David mentioned you want to scale back the rollout. That's not going to work for us." This was the classic American corporate trap, the marketing versus engineering showdown. The old me would have been intimidated by her energy. I would have said, "I'll see what I can do," and then stayed up for weeks trying to accomplish the impossible, eventually burning out and failing. The sentiment analysis module is currently at a 40% error rate under heavy load, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice steady. "If we ship it in Q3, the platform will give inaccurate data to our biggest clients. We'd be lying to them." "Inaccuracy is a relative term in marketing, Mariam," Sarah snapped, leaning across my desk. "We need the wow factor. We can patch the accuracy in Q4. Right now, we need the sizzle." "I don't sell sizzle," I replied. I felt a surge of confidence I'd never known. "I sell software that works. If we ship a broken product, we destroy our reputation. I won't sign off on a Q3 launch with that feature. We can launch the core platform in Q3 and add sentiment analysis as a premium update in Q4 when it's stable. Sarah narrowed her eyes. Jack would have found a way. Jack is gone because he found ways that didn't exist, I said. You can take this to David if you want, but I've already sent him the stability reports. In this department, we prioritize the integrity of the code over the billboard. Sarah stared at me for a long beat, her face unreadable. Then, she let out a short, sharp laugh and stood up. You're a lot tougher than you look, Mariam. Jack told me you were a pushover. Clearly, he was wrong. I'll go talk to the designers about the update schedule. As she walked out, I realized that my shyness had always been a fear of conflict. I thought that by avoiding no, I was making things easier. But in reality, I was just making myself a doormat. By saying no with the weight of facts behind me, I hadn't made an enemy, I had set a boundary. And in the high-pressure environment of a US tech firm, boundaries are the only things that keep you sane. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited my core dev team out for a celebratory dinner. We didn't go to a loud, trendy club. We went to a quiet, dimly lit ramen shop in Japantown. As we sat there, slurping noodles and talking about everything from sci-fi movies to the future of AI, I realized that I was actually leading. I wasn't leading through fear or ego. I was leading through shared passion. You know, Mariam, Mark said, leaning back in his chair, when Jack was in charge, we all felt like we were just parts in a machine. We were afraid to tell him when something was broken because he'd just yell. Now, it feels like we're actually building something together again. I looked around the table at my team. They were the brilliant, quiet people I used to hide with. And now, they were looking at me to represent them. I realized that my journey wasn't just about my own career. It was about changing the culture of the room. I had survived the theft of my work, the intimidation of a bully, and the terror of my own voice. And as the cool San Francisco fog rolled past the windows of the restaurant, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was no longer the girl who sat in the back. I was the one who was leading the way home. Success in Silicon Valley is often measured by how well you handle a crisis, and for me, that crisis came in the middle of my second month as lead engineer. We were 3 weeks away from the official Q4 launch of Project Aurora. The pressure was immense. In the United States, once a company announces a launch date to the public and the investors, the clock doesn't just tick, it screams. Every morning, I woke up to a barrage of emails from VPs, analysts, and partners, all asking the same thing. Is it ready? The old Mariam would have crumbled under this weight. I would have been so paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake that I wouldn't have made any decisions at all. But I was learning that leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about making the best decision you can with the information you have. I spent my mornings in the war room, coordinating between the front-end designers, the back-end developers, and the infrastructure team. I was no longer just a coder. I was an orchestrator. Then, the floor dropped out from under us. One of our primary third-party data providers, a massive cloud service that Aurora relied on for real-time processing, announced an emergency maintenance window that would overlap with our launch week. In simple terms, the engine we were using was going to be offline exactly when we needed to show the world our platform. This is a disaster, David said, pacing back and forth in my office. We've already spent $2 million on the launch event. The press is invited. We can't move the date now, Mariam. We'll look like we don't know what we're doing. The VCs will pull their funding. I looked at the technical specs on my screen. My mind was racing. If we go live without that provider, Aurora will be nothing more than a static website. It won't have any of the predictive power we promised. Is there a workaround? David asked, stopping in front of my desk. He looked tired. The stress of the company was etched into his face. There's a backup provider, I said slowly, but their API is different. We'd have to rewrite the entire data ingestion layer in 14 days. My team is already working 80 hours a week. If I ask them to do this, they might quit. It's an impossible task. I saw David's shoulders sag. For a moment, I saw the fear in him that I used to feel in myself. If we don't do it, the project dies. The company probably dies with it. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the San Francisco traffic was a river of light. I thought about my team, the quiet, brilliant engineers who had finally started to trust me. I thought about how Jack would have handled this. He would have lied. He would have told David it was fine, and then he would have blamed the developers when it crashed on launch day. I won't lie to them, David, I said, turning back to him. And I won't order them to do it. But I will ask them. That afternoon, I gathered the entire Aurora team in the break room. I didn't stand on a stage this time. I sat on one of the tables, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. I told them everything. I didn't sugarcoat the situation. I told them about the maintenance window, the risks to the company, and the impossible amount of work it would take to pivot. I'm not going to demand that you stay late, I told them. The room was silent, the kind of heavy silence I knew so well. You've all worked harder than anyone should have to. But if we do this, if we rewrite the layer, we'll own our destiny. We won't be dependent on a single provider ever again. I'll be here every night, coding right alongside you. But the choice is yours. One by one, they started to nod. Mark, the junior dev, was the first to speak. We've come too far to let a maintenance window kill our baby Mariam. Let's do it. The next 14 days were a blur of caffeine, whiteboards, and lines of code that felt like they were etched into my eyelids. We lived in the office. We ordered pizza at midnight and breakfast burritos at 6 a.m. In the United States, they call this crunch time, but for us, it felt like a revolution. I was no longer the shy girl who hid behind her monitor. I was in the trenches, jumping from desk to desk, solving deadlocks, optimizing queries, and keeping morale high with bad jokes and even worse coffee. But then, a ghost from the past appeared. On the 10th day of the crunch, I was walking to the parking garage at 2 a.m. to get some fresh air when I saw a car idling near the entrance. The window rolled down. It was Jack. He looked even worse than the last time I'd seen him. He looked haunted. I heard about the cloud outage, Mariam, he said, his voice raspy. Word travels fast in this city. You're in over your head, aren't you? You should have let me stay. I could have talked the provider out of the maintenance window. I could have handled the press. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. He was still trying to talk his way out of a technical reality. The world doesn't work on favors and charisma, Jack, I said, my voice cold and steady. It works on logic and hard work. We're not talking our way out of this. We're coding our way out of it. You'll fail, he sneered. And when you do, everyone will remember that the quiet little mouse was the one who crashed the company. If I fail, I'll fail honestly, I replied. Which is something you'll never understand. I walked away from his car without looking back. His words didn't sting anymore. They felt like the dying echoes of a world I no longer lived in. I went back into the office, sat down at my desk, and finished the final encryption module. The night before the launch, the office was quiet. The code was pushed. The tests were passing. We had done it. We had rewritten 3 months of work in 2 weeks. I walked through the rows of desks and saw my team slumped over their keyboards, sleeping in their chairs, or staring blankly at their screens in a state of total exhaustion. They had given me everything because I had finally given them a leader who spoke the truth. I went into my corner office and looked at the framed Project Aurora poster on the wall. I realized that my shyness hadn't been a weakness, it had been a filter. It had kept me quiet until I had something worth saying. And now that I was speaking, I was changing lives. Tomorrow was the launch. The VCs would be there, the press would be there, and the entire tech world would be watching. I knew there were still risks. I knew things could still go wrong. But as I closed my eyes for a few hours of sleep on the office sofa, I wasn't afraid. I had found my voice, I had found my team, and I had found my place in the world. The girl who was too shy to say hello was gone. In her place was the architect of the future. And she was just getting started. The morning of the launch felt like the atmosphere before a storm, heavy, electric, and shimmering with anticipation. We were at a luxury event space in downtown San Francisco, a place of glass and steel that screamed future. The logo for Project Aurora was projected onto every wall, a swirling vortex of colors that represented the data we were finally about to unleash. I stood backstage, wearing a sharp navy blazer, my battle suit, and watched through a crack in the curtain as the room filled up. Silicon Valley royalty was there. Venture capitalists, tech journalists, and CEOs of partner companies. In the past, this sight would have made me physically ill. I would have been searching for the nearest exit, hyperventilating at the thought of all those eyes on me. But as I checked the live server status on my tablet one last time, I felt a strange, cool stillness. The impossible pivot we had pulled off in the last 14 days had burned away the last remnants of my self-doubt. When you've rebuilt an entire engine while the plane is mid-flight, a room full of people in suits doesn't seem that scary anymore. David walked up to me, looking remarkably calm for a man whose entire net worth was tied to the next 60 minutes. "You ready, Mariam?" he asked. "The CEO of the retail giant just arrived. She asked for you specifically." "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to fake the confidence. The lights dimmed, and a deep bass hum filled the room. David went out first, giving a brief introduction about the company's mission. Then, the moment came. "Please welcome the architect behind Project Aurora, our lead engineer, Mariam." I walked out onto the stage. The applause was polite, but I could feel the curiosity. I wasn't the typical tech bro they were used to. I was a young woman who had spent years being invisible, and now I was standing in the center of their world. I didn't start with a joke or a flashy story. I did exactly what I had promised myself I would do. I spoke the technical truth. For a long time, I thought that to be a leader, you had to be the loudest person in the room, I told the audience. My voice was amplified, clear, and resonant. I thought that ideas didn't count unless they were wrapped in charisma. But Project Aurora isn't about charisma. It's about the integrity of data. It's about building something that stands up when the world tries to knock it down. I spent the next 40 minutes doing a live, deep dive demonstration. I didn't just show them the results, I showed them the why. I explained the non-blocking queue system, the new ingestion layer, and how we had overcome the cloud outage just days before. I was transparent about our challenges, and in that transparency, I found a level of authority that Jack's lies could never have achieved. When I finished the final stress test, showing 1,000,000 concurrent requests being handled without a single millisecond of lag, the room didn't just applaud. They stood up. It was a standing ovation from the toughest crowd in the world. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. I was interviewed by Wired and TechCrunch. I shook hands with investors who were suddenly very interested in our Series B funding. But the most important moment happened at the very end of the night, back at the office. The team had gathered in the break room for a quiet celebration. We were all exhausted, but there was a sense of profound fulfillment in the room. Mark walked over to me, holding a plastic cup of champagne. "We did it, Mariam. We actually did it. And we did it without selling our souls." "We did," I said, clinking my cup against his. "And we did it together." I went into my office to pack up my things. As I was leaving, I saw a familiar figure standing by the elevators. It was Jack. He wasn't sneering anymore. He looked broken, a relic of a style of leadership that was rapidly becoming obsolete. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was going to say something nasty. Instead, he just whispered, "I didn't think you had it in you." "I always had it in me, Jack," I said, waiting for the elevator doors to open. "I just didn't have a reason to show you. But thank you. By trying to steal my work, you forced me to find my voice. I wouldn't be here without that push." The doors opened, and I stepped in. As they closed, I saw Jack's reflection fade away. He was the past. I was the future. The story of my life used to be about what I didn't say. It was a story of silence, of missed opportunities, and of letting others define my worth. But that story ended the day I stood up in that war room. Today, my story is about the power of the quiet leader. I've realized that being shy isn't a flaw you have to fix. It's a perspective. It makes you a better listener, a deeper thinker, and when you finally do speak, it makes your words carry 10 times the weight. A year later, Project Aurora is the industry standard. I'm now the CTO of Quantum Dynamics. I still don't like loud parties, and I still get a little nervous before big presentations. But I don't hide anymore. I make sure that in every meeting I lead, we stop to hear from the person in the back of the room, the one who's quiet, the one who's taking notes, the one who probably has the best idea in the building. My name is Mariam. I used to be a ghost in the machine. But now I'm the one who writes the code for the world I want to live in. And I'm not whispering anymore.